The legendary Battle of Little Bighorn is etched in history as a fierce clash between Custer's 7th Cavalry and the Native American warriors. But what truly happened after the guns fell silent? Beyond the tales of heroism and defeat lies a hidden story, one of shocking brutality and revenge so savage it was buried deep from public knowledge for decades. Tonight, we uncover the untold horrors that followed Custer's last stand. Details so grim they were kept secret, yet so important they redefine what we thought we knew about this historic battle. Stay with us as we reveal the grim aftermath, the raw human cost, and the brutal truth the history books won't tell you. Lieutenant Colonel Custer has fallen. It is a calamity, but what follows is even more terrifying. Having endured terrible suffering at the hands of the Americans, Sitting Bull's people sought more than just victory. They demanded humiliation. Custer's brutal treatment of them would be avenged completely. Certain details were so disturbing they were concealed from the American public. Bodies were mutilated, men disfigured beyond recognition, and Custer himself was so badly abused that the army had to deceive his widow. This reveals the hidden reality of what unfolded after Custer's final stand. For the triumphant Lakota and Cheyenne, it was natural to begin by plundering the possessions of their fallen foes. The American soldiers had many valuable items that now rightly belonged to the victors, who would have done the same if the battle had gone differently. Weapons, jewelry, clothing, badges, even horses abandoned on the battlefield were theirs to claim. Lakota warrior Brave Bear witnessed it all. There was much arguing and fussing about the captured horses and guns. Warriors exchanged remarks like, "I got some tobacco," "I got coffee," "I got a fine gun." For them, this spoils were a deserved prize. The looting was harsh toward the dead. Most were stripped of their clothes and left naked to decay under the sun. The Lakota and Cheyenne customarily took scalps from defeated enemies, and this occasion was no exception. For hours following the fight, the hills were a horrifying scene of warriors cutting scalps from the fallen as trophies. It was not only men who suffered this fate. Native stories recall how even camp women came forward to desecrate the bodies. 2 Cheyenne women asserted they had pierced Custer's ears with awls. It was later disclosed that an arrow had been forced into an indescribable location on Custer's body, a detail the army suppressed to spare his widow distress. According to the Lakota warrior Ironhawk, some of Custer's soldiers feigned death to evade the men, only to be discovered by these women. He recalled seeing 2 elderly women stripping a body and commencing its dismemberment, prompting the soldier to leap up and resist. The soldier was swiftly killed, but Ironhawk found the spectacle of a naked man attempting to fight off 2 old women humorous. One individual who reportedly found no amusement in this was Sitting Bull. He claimed his visions had predicted a great triumph, but had cautioned that if his warriors desecrated the deceased, they would be hexed. Whether Sitting Bull genuinely opposed the mutilation remains uncertain, as interviews with him occurred years after his defeat. He might have been merely disassociating himself from acts deemed outrageous by the public. Yet the conflict did not conclude with Custer's demise. The majority of the 7th Cavalry remained, led by Major Marcus Reno and Captain Frederick Benteen, who had entrenched themselves on Reno Hill. Sitting Bull's warriors assailed them throughout the night of the 25th and all day on the 26th. They only ceased their attack on the morning of the 27th, when their scouts spotted approaching American reinforcements. Benteen and Reno had been too preoccupied with survival to ascertain Custer's fate. It was actually the reinforcements under General Alfred Terry and Colonel John Gibbon who first grasped the magnitude of the catastrophe at Little Bighorn. Gibbon's scouts initially discovered the blood-stained garments of American officers in deserted camps near the battlefield. They had been plundered from the dead, but discarded when Sitting Bull retreated. News of this grim finding had barely reached Gibbon and Terry when a second scout arrived with even more disturbing information. "I have tallied 197 lifeless forms scattered across the hills," the scout reported. "White men?" was the immediate query.
"Yes, white men," the scout confirmed. Terry and Gibbon then understood that a terrible calamity had occurred. Gibbon and Terry feared the complete annihilation of the 7th Cavalry. However, their scouts soon located Benteen and Reno's surviving troops on nearby hills. Terry and Gibbon hurried to meet them, finding Benteen and Reno battered but alive, along with most of their men. Both men were oblivious to Custer's catastrophe, assuming he had deserted them in pursuit of personal glory. They were promptly set straight. Benteen and a contingent of his men were sent to locate Custer. What they discovered was utterly devastating. The unclothed remains of their comrades had already begun to decompose after 2 days under the scorching Montana sun. They first came across the bodies of L Company, led by Custer's brother-in-law, Lieutenant James Calhoun. They lay in the defensive arrangement they had assumed in their final moments atop Calhoun Hill. Most other bodies exhibited no such formation. It was unclear whether they had all perished in disarray or if the Native Americans had subsequently moved the bodies.
Another group of bodies was concentrated on what became known as Last Stand Hill. It was Private Jacob Adams who first found the 7th's commanding officer. He immediately summoned Captain Benteen, who rushed over to verify the identity. "By God!" Benteen exclaimed. "That's him!" George Custer's body was discovered near the summit of Last Stand Hill, 20 feet from his brother Tom. Like the rest of the men, he had been stripped of all clothing except his socks. General Custer had not been scalped, though Tom had. The body was found sitting upright against the bodies of 2 other soldiers, as if at rest. His expression was rather that of a man who had fallen asleep, Lieutenant James Bradley later wrote. The other 200 bodies from Custer's command lay dispersed between the hills and the river near Sitting Bull's abandoned camp. In a dispatch to a newspaper, Lieutenant Bradley conveyed to the public that the remains of the deceased had not been severely defiled. There was little mutilation, he asserted in his correspondence, adding that the wounds he observed seemed to stem from dispatching an injured individual, nothing more. Regrettably, he was being disingenuous. I have seen where Lieutenant Bradley stated the bodies were not significantly disfigured. Private Charles Windolph, a soldier who later accompanied Benteen to the battle site, remarked, "That was kind of him to spare the feelings of the relatives, but they were badly mutilated, some of them too bad to describe. The majority of the bodies suffered horrific damage." For instance, Isaiah Dorman, an African-American scout, was extensively mutilated, and the adversary had left a kettle filled with his own blood beside him as a deliberate affront. Most of the corpses had been scalped. Many had been riddled with arrows or shattered by axes or hammers posthumously. The entire battlefield served as a gruesome display of brutality. Custer himself had not escaped this treatment. Officially, the soldiers merely documented his evident injuries, a bullet wound to the chest below the heart and another to his left temple. Either wound could have proven lethal. There was also a knife wound in his thigh. The soldiers collectively agreed not to disclose that an arrow had been forced into an ignominious place in his trousers. Such a detail would only distress his widow and was concealed for many years. His brother Tom had sustained even more grievous injuries. He had been scalped, his skull crushed, and disemboweled. Had it not been for the tattoo discovered on his arm, identification would have been impossible. Given that 2 days had passed since the engagement, the bodies were already undergoing decomposition by the time they were discovered. 2 days under the summer Montana sun significantly exacerbated their condition. Colonel Gibbon confessed that by the time he arrived, the bodies had already become unbearable. The sight and stench of the dead left a lasting trauma on those who witnessed it. It's commonly believed that everyone on Custer's Hill was dead before Benteen reached them, but this isn't entirely accurate. Private Jacob Adams, who claimed to be the first to find Custer, uncovered another shocking truth on that hill. As Adams and his comrades moved through the wreckage, they heard a faint, distressed noise coming from among the corpses. The sound came from a lone survivor, a 14-year-old bay horse named Comanche. Comanche belonged to one of Custer's officers, whose body lay nearby. Despite having taken 7 wounds from bullets and arrows and suffering from days without water, the horse stayed loyally by his master's side. Adams and the soldiers hurried to aid him. No cavalryman disrespects the horses that serve alongside them. Though injured, Comanche managed to stand and later rejoined the surviving members of the 7th Cavalry. Other horses were recovered from the surrounding land as well, but Comanche's wounds and solitary presence on Last Stand Hill earned him special distinction. He recovered from his injuries and lived a long retirement as the 7th Cavalry's mascot until his death in 1891. Comanche is one of only 4 horses ever given a military funeral with full honors. June 27th was dedicated to counting and identifying the dead. Many bodies couldn't be identified, and those that were identified often weren't identified with certainty.
19 bodies from the battle were never found at all. In the decades after the fight, human remains were still discovered in the hills, indicating that some men initially escaped the chaos on Last Stand Hill, only to be hunted down later. On the morning of June 28th, soldiers began burying the dead. Benteen counted 208 bodies to be interred that day, while Lieutenant Bradley recorded 206. Whatever the exact count, the task was rushed. Concerned that Sitting Bull or other hostile Native Americans might return, they had no time to dig proper graves for the 200 or so men. Most were placed together in hurried mass graves or buried shallowly where they fell. Several graves bore name markers. Custer and his brother Tom were interred side by side. Their grave, dug at the hill's base, was scarcely 2 feet deep, just enough to cover their bodies. The brothers were wrapped in canvas and laid together. A small sled and a circle of stones were placed to deter scavengers. Conflicting stories exist about who exactly dug Custer's grave and buried him, with several men eager to claim the honor. By 6:30 p.m., the task was complete. General Terry was anxious to depart and begin the long journey back to the main Bighorn River, setting out that evening. Still, 50 wounded men required proper care, and the news of the defeat needed to reach the authorities. The trek back to where the Little Bighorn joined the Bighorn River was lengthy, where the steamer Far West awaited the injured. Medics did what they could along the way. At least one man underwent leg amputation, though several succumbed to their wounds. The aftermath weighed heavily on survivors. Major Reno turned to alcohol, purchasing 11 gallons of whiskey in the 22 days following his return from Little Bighorn. Captain Benteen similarly struggled with drinking, which sparked a drunken altercation between him and Captain Thomas Weir. Weir accused Benteen of abandoning Custer during the battle. Benteen rejected the charge and challenged Weir to a duel to defend his honor, but Weir declined. Unable to live with the guilt from Little Bighorn, Weir was later found dead in his New York hotel room in December 1876. Meanwhile, the steamer Far West sped up the Missouri River, carrying news of the defeat and 38 wounded men. It broke speed records by covering the 710-mile journey to the 7th Cavalry's Fort Abraham Lincoln in under 3 days. The ship's arrival roused Libby Custer before dawn on July 6th. Shortly after, at 7 a.m., senior officers at the fort knocked on her door. Libby hurried to answer as the officers insisted on speaking with her inside. Libby hurried to the door, where the officers insisted she speak with them inside. By then, her sister-in-law Maggie was awake as well, anxious for news about her brothers and her husband, Lieutenant James Calhoun, who had served alongside them. The officers took the women to the parlor and delivered the heartbreaking news. Libby and George had been childhood sweethearts and married for 12 years. Their surviving love letters reveal the depth of their devotion. His death was a crushing blow to her. Lieutenant Gurley later recalled it as one of the hardest moments of his life, describing the grief of these devastated women. their uncontrollable sobbing and tears that offered no comfort. Despite her sorrow, Libby Custer did not let her grief stop her from fulfilling her responsibilities. She insisted on accompanying the officers as they informed the other 26 women at the fort who had now become widows. The remainder of Libby's life was shaped by the loss she suffered at Little Bighorn. She steadfastly defended her husband's reputation and blamed Reno and Benteen for the defeat until her passing in 1933. The news went public the following day. Washington received word by telegraph that morning. Having just observed the nation's centennial 3 days earlier, the shock of Custer's defeat sent a wave of disbelief. Newspapers dominated the headlines for days, filled with speculation. People debated who was at fault: Custer's recklessness, failures of Benteen and Reno. Ultimately, the country mourned one of the most devastating losses ever inflicted by Native American forces. What really happened after Custer's defeat? Was the brutal truth hidden to protect reputations or to shield us from harsh realities? Secrets still linger beneath the Montana sun, and some stories remain untold. What's your take? Justice or something darker? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. There's more history waiting to be uncovered.